If Donald Trump is capable of everything you're saying, when do you think he'll be able to resolve the conflict in Ukraine? Well, you know, the question isn't quite accurately framed. If it only depended on Trump, the war would have ended long ago. There are two conflicting sides here, Russia and Ukraine. They've dragged us in there too, Belarus. We border this conflict, and we're also not indifferent to how events will develop there and how it will end. So this is a multilateral process, and Trump alone won't resolve this issue. I spoke with him by phone before Alaska, when he was meeting with Putin. I told him directly that this isn't a short period. You need to prepare for hard work. You won't be able to solve this problem quickly. That's what's happening. I advised him then to undertake all efforts to agree with Russia to stop the war. The shooting needs to stop on the front, and all movement in the direction of war must cease. When there's no shooting, when people aren't dying, then we can talk for a month, 2 months, years. For example, the Soviet Union and Russia still haven't concluded a peace treaty with Japan. They're still conducting negotiations on a peace agreement. But this doesn't prevent them from cooperating. There's no war. People aren't dying. So the main thing today is to stop the carnage. So people don't die. I emphasize once again that no one should be wary that we've stopped the conflict at a time when Russia is winning. This is indeed the case. Everything must be done so that Ukraine and its army don't rearm during this time, so that Americans don't supply weapons together with Europeans. Freeze this conflict from beginning to end. People aren't dying. Then sit and negotiate about whatever you want. Territorially and in other ways. The main thing is to stop people dying. Much depends on Trump. Right here in this hall, negotiations began in 2015, in February. Merkel, Hollande, Putin, Poroshenko were here. We sat right here and negotiated. We reached an agreement. European leaders then took a foolish position. They wanted Ukrainians to have time to rearm and repel Russia. They didn't come to negotiate peace, but future war. An agreement was concluded. The mediators were Germany and France. What did it end with? Nothing. I suggested that Americans needed to be included. Without America, there will be no peace. If the Minsk agreements had been implemented, there would have been no war. Trump is right about that. He says if he had been president, there would have been no war. Most likely, yes. But Trump wasn't in power then. What happened, happened. Now much depends on Trump and the United States. The main thing is that Trump doesn't retreat. He's a man of character, sometimes impulsive. He must not wave his hand and walk away. If he persists, there will be a result. Europeans have nothing to shout about. President Trump was disappointed with President Putin and President Zelensky. What does Putin want? I'm certain that Putin wants peace. There are internal and external reasons. Zelensky wants peace too. But their views on how the war should end differ. Trump says we must look at realities. We must look at the results of the war today. If Ukraine believes it can defeat Russia, let it fight. But if this continues, Ukraine will disappear from the map. It will cease to exist. What's most dangerous is escalation. It could end badly for Europe and the world. It could become a global conflict. It must be extinguished now. Now there is such an opportunity. Why did Putin start this war? Americans weren't told the true reasons. I'll give you an example. You have Mexico nearby. Russia has Ukraine nearby. If Americans in Mexico were forced to give up English, if their children were oppressed, if Americans were burned alive, how would you act? You would wipe Mexico off the face of the earth. It was the same in Ukraine. Why force people to give up the Russian language? Let people choose. This became state policy in Ukraine. If you live next to a sleeping bear, don't wake it. Find ways to coexist. Russia reached agreements with Ukraine. Russia supplied cheap energy. Were relations normal?
If I understand you correctly, earlier you said that
No.
Trump had been
Если я
president
правильно
before
воспринимал,
that
если бы
started.
тогда Трамп был президентом, то этой войны бы не случилось.
With help from Americans and Europeans, Maidan happened.
If President
Но президент
Zelensky was
Зеленский,
sitting here,
он
he'd
говорил,
say
что
the
война
war
началась
The
started
president was overthrown.
в Крыму.
If Trump had been president, the war wouldn't have happened.
Сегодня Зеленский и власти украинские говорят, что Крым украинский. Крым – это вообще жемчужина. Кому бы он ни принадлежал, это жемчужина.
I'm convinced of that.
Уголок. Они говорят, что война началась.
If he had conducted the same policy,
Воюют две стороны. В Крыму не было ни одного выстрела.
Zelensky says the war began in Crimea.
Украинцам, россиянам зачем было стрелять, когда они заняли и освободили, как они
There was no war in Crimea. War is when sides fight with weapons.
За Крым никто не воевал. За Крым никто не сражался. Это было на моих глазах. Ни одного выстрела со стороны Украины.
But they annexed it. They
Аннексировали
annexed
Крым они.
Crimea.
Можно говорить, аннексировали, можно освободить.
There wasn't a single Ukrainian shot.
Не в этом дело.
You can call it annexation or capture.
Эту землю. Украинцы ее отдали. Они ее
But if it was your land, why didn't you defend it?
говорил, что там россияне поступили разумно еще.
Any war ends with peace.
С теми, кто должен был защищать Крым,
This war will end with
Крым
peace.
фактически был сдан. Зеленым человечком, как вы их называли тогда.
Как закончится эта война?
Любая война заканчивается миром. Классика. И эта война закончится миром. Чем раньше, тем меньше погибнет людей.
The sooner, the fewer will die.
Знаете, погиб и погиб. А сколько искалеченных людей.
Many crippled people are returning.
С ними как быть? Без ног, без рук. Вот обмены идут на нашей территории.
Exchanges are happening.
Обмены идут.
But how would you actually get Putin
Но
and
как на самом
Zelensky
деле Путину...
How can peace be achieved?
Вы знаете, я думаю, что вот та обстановка,
Circumstances will push them to peace.
президентов, их подтолкнет к тому, чтобы...
Russians don't like war.
Россиянам нравится, что идет война? Конечно, нет. Если будет эскалация, это может привести к мобилизации в России. Мобилизации, к еще большему вовлечению населения. Это будет хорошо для России? Не будет хорошо. Ну и потом, Путин мне часто об этом говорит, воюем тут друг против друга, свои люди. Тут и психология, и многие-многие вопросы. Зеленский прекрасно...
Escalation could lead to mobilization.
Это может...
Zelensky knows Ukraine could cease to exist.
И вот эти вот факторы, плюс давление Трампа на одного...
External pressure will intensify.
Внешнее, если не договорятся...
Russia wants guarantees forever.
Еще более усилится. Вот эти факторы, они давлеют на...
Ukraine wants this too.
И они понимают, что надо остановить.
Trump is ready to be a guarantor.
Но должны быть гарантии. Россия хочет гарантии, чтобы это было навсегда. Я это знаю. Россия хочет, чтобы заключить такой мирный договор, чтобы никогда больше война не началась. В этом
Everything is there.
Трамп готов...
We must speed up.
Этого. Ну, все есть. Поэтому надо интенсифицироваться.
Europeans whisper to Zelensky to keep fighting.
В данном случае больше украинского президента.
They won't
Не
help.
хочет идти на сделку, как Трамп об этом говорит. Почему не хочет? Потому что европейцы ввязались в это. И они ему нашептывают на ухо, что они будут помогать Зеленскому воевать. Ничего они не помогут. У них нет того ресурса, который есть у Соединенных Штатов Америки. И если
They
американцы
lack
от этого
resources.
отойдут, эскалации не избежать.
If
Но
America
когда
steps away,
стороны
escalation is
страны
inevitable.
поймут свою
So
ошибку,
what happens if President Trump
Что
The
произойдет,
war will
если
continue
Трамп будет разочарован, и он просто от этого устранится.
война продолжится.
until Zelensky is forced to make
Война
peace.
продолжится, пока в Украине не возобладают
When the front
силы,
collapses
которые
completely.
вынудят Зеленского пойти на мир. А эти силы
Signs of this are already
тогда,
visible.
когда начнет рушиться фронт полностью. Хотя уже начало это видно сейчас.